I gotta go. This is August 21st, 2002. I am with Mr. Martin Marks of 306 Berry Hill Drive, Carborough, North Carolina. Mr. Marks was born on April 30th, 1922, and served in World War II, and is going to share his experiences with us. I am Commander Paul Zucker of the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary, who will be interviewing Mr. Marks, and also I am the cameraman and editor of this film. Mr. Marks, you want to tell us a little bit about where you were born?
Sure. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but I only spent about 5 years of my life there because my father, who had 2 other children at that time, decided he would raise us all in the idyllic settings of Nassau County, Long Island. So we moved out to a town called Cedarhurst, and we lived there until I entered college in 1938. And I didn't like the island too much, and so I was glad to get away and go to college, and I went to Harvard. And at the end of the Harvard 4 years, I was ready to go to law school because my father was a lawyer, and I was accepted at Harvard Law School, but I'd found out that if I went to the Harvard Law School at that time, which was 42, 43, I'd have been drafted immediately into the infantry. So I decided I'd accept a Navy offer to allow me to go to Harvard Business School for most of my MBA degree, and then after that go into active duty as an ensign in the Naval Reserve, and that's the way it worked out.
Okay, so that's how you basically got into the reserve. You didn't actually volunteer, or
no.
In that case, you were semi-drafted per se.
Well, I like the idea of being a naval officer rather than being a infantry private.
And what functions did you have when you were in the Navy, Marty?
Well, I was a supply officer. I was in the supply corps, and we started out the first year of duty after I got trained. I was a dispersing officer, which meant that I paid all the people in the ship that I was serving on for a year. And then when the supply officer, which is a higher duty, left the ship because he went back to the States, I took over his job as supply officer, which meant I had the charge of feeding the people, running the officers' mess, provisioning the ship, running the hardware, software that the ship needed to run while we went through various different campaigns.
And what ship was this?
It's called the USS Bowditch. It was a survey ship.
A survey. And just explain what a survey ship does.
Okay, well, a survey ship partially was run by naval officers, but also was run by members of the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, who were some of the primary officers on the ship. And their function was to survey the harbors in which the various different campaigns in the Central Pacific took place, so that we could have charts which we were equipped to draw for use by the battleships and aircraft carriers and cruisers which went into these harbors. So we were always really among the forefront of all the ships that went into these harbors before even the whole Navy went in there. So every one of the campaigns, while the island was being taken over by the Navy and the Army and the Marines, our ship was there.
I see. So, want to talk about when you got aboard the ship, where you were first, where you went, and what islands you were in the Pacific? Sure. Is that right?
Yes. Actually, I was 4 months before I joined the ships. They sent me to a naval air station in Squantum, Massachusetts, on the Cape, and then I had to fly across country to Rhode Island Navy Yard, which unfortunately ended up by being rather a fiasco because I got bumped off the plane by higher ranking officers. I was only an ensign, and I had to continue the rest of the trip from Denver all the way to the Pacific coast and missed my ship. So the ship would sail for Hawaii, and I was in Mare Island, and they had to put me on a different ship, and I didn't actually join my ship for another week or two while I made the trip from San Francisco to Hawaii.
Okay, Marty, I'm going to stop this for 1 second while I adjust your microphone.
Okay.
Okay, so at the point that we'll pick up where we left off. You missed your ship.
Mm-hmm. Spent a few days in California. It was wintertime, but California was lovely, and sunshine, and Southern California. And I learned a little bit about the new. So I joined the ship. This first time I had a chance to really get onto active duty. My ship was waiting there at the harbor at Waikiki, and I joined the ship, met most of the fellow officers, and this ship was a survey ship, but actually it had been a banana boat that was used by the Grace Lines to run from Florida to Cuba and Haiti and so on and pick up fruit and other vegetables, and the Navy took it over and made it into a warship. So my office was actually part of the hull where they had been keeping the vegetables and fruit that they brought back to the United States. Of course, there were cannons and machine guns and other equipment on board the ship, but it did look like a Navy. It didn't look like a Navy ship at all. It was a civilian ship, really.
And these ships were sent in long before the troops got there. Do you want to go?
Yes, when the troops were still maybe in the process of killing the Japanese who were on the islands. That happened in most cases. Most of the islands we started in first were a little more than atolls. I mean, Majuro was the first island we went to. Kwajalein was the second. Then we went to Guam and Saipan, which were more like solid islands. In all cases, our ship was one of the first ships into these harbors, and we finished our job by sending out what they call YPs, which are small ships which we could hoist aboard our ship, and they would sound the harbors and come back to the ship with their soundings. Then we had a drafting room with Coast and Geodetic Survey people who could actually take the soundings and make charts showing the depths throughout the actual harbor, so that the big ships could venture in there. And
so being among the first, I mean, being in there even before the landings of the troops, before the landing ships were coming in, did you feel frightened about doing that at any
no,
time?
I just was fatalistic about it.
Meaning what?
Well, I just said, what will be, will be. I mean, there was so many different ways I could have gotten killed, but to be frightened about it was just not
And were there any circumstances in which your life was in danger?
Yeah, the further we got towards Japan, as the kamikazes became more active in Guam and Saipan, a lot of Americans got killed there because the Japanese suicide planes would take a beam on a ship and would come scooting down from on high and crash into the smokestacks, and the destroyers who were doing the patrol duty around the island, you'd see them steaming into the harbor with a Japanese plane sticking out of the smokestack. And one time, the closest escape we ever had was as we were watching the battles that were going on. A Japanese kamikaze plane came down, more or less headed for our ship, and it only landed about 100 yards off the bow of our ship.
In the water?
In the water. That
wow.
crashed in the water.
And
right.
you saw that? You actually saw that
Yes,
crash happen?
we saw that happening, right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
A lot of the time when there was battles going on, I was busy taking messages which were in code, and we had a decoding machine which to deliver the text of the message to the captain so he knew what was going on. And that was my job as my dual job as I had as a supply officer. I had to also run the decoding machine.
Okay, and this was like some kind of typewriter type of device, or what?
It was an electronic thing with rolls in it, and they had, I don't know quite how it worked, but it ended up, you typed in a bunch of garbage, gibberish, and out came a tape, which was actually the message that had to be delivered to the captain.
Oh, okay.
Of course, there was also signal flags that had to be displayed, which they sent signals back and forth. Generally speaking, there were ships around us. We were not alone.
Uh-huh.
Smaller ships, bigger ships.
And what do you remember about sort of the accommodations aboard a ship and the food? What was that like?
Well, it was sort of a standing joke. The Navy really had it much better than the troops on land.
Uh-huh.
We had fresh fruit, we had milk, we had baked potatoes, we had meat, And our food was good. We never had to worry about where our next meal was coming from. We never got involved in C rations or K rations, such as the troops on shore were. And they used to really envy us. Actually, the people on shore would come and visit us once in a while, and their eyes would open up the kind of food we had to eat. So it was a pretty good life. I mean,
and what about your sleeping accommodations and?
I had my own room as an officer, and the crew was sleeping in bunks, two up, three up, and some of them were sleeping below decks. I was just about on the main deck, and I was also responsible for running the officers' mess as well as the mess for the crew. Mess being, of course, a eating place.
Right.
I was responsible for making sure that the right kind of food was being brought aboard. Some of the more exciting episodes there were I had to go from our ship to other ships because I was running out of money. I was running out of cash. I was paying these guys for their salaries, and after a while it was all cash. I had to replenish my cash supply, and I had to do this by climbing down a ladder on the side of the ship, getting into a boat, cruising over to one of the largest ships that the Navy sent in with my bag and a pistol tied around me to protect myself. I picked up the money and get back to the ship.
I see. So the headquarters ship must have carried large amounts of money.
Money and food. Yes, they had everything we needed. I forgot to say, I also ran something which we call the gidung stand. The gidung stand was the candy and soda stand.
Oh, so that's what the guys use their money for? Because I was going to ask, what would be the purpose of having money in Guam?
Well, they sent it home too.
Oh, I see.
But a lot of that was done what they called by allotments. In other words, their salary was on paper was allotted to their relatives.
Oh, so checks were sent back by the government then to the home, huh?
That's right. The payroll was then showed that all of their payroll was not given to them. The cash was used, I'd say, mostly the good gidung stand and clothing, and
clothing
and games.
What clothing would they need outside of their uniforms?
Well, the uniform. I'm talking about uniforms.
They had to buy their uniforms, you're saying?
Yep.
Oh.
And buy the uniform. We also ran what was called the clothing and ship store shop, where they could go and buy their uniform. That was also a function that came under me. We sold only Navy clothing, of course. But they bought pants and shirts and jackets and hats and all the other.
I thought all that would be government issue during the war, but
no. They were given an allowance. So really, the government was paying.
I see what you're saying.
Had a clothing allowance, yeah. So they could buy it whenever they needed to, and just by going into the shop to buy the clothing.
And you're working. You were like working 7 days a week.
Pretty much, yeah. We had no weekends. It was all very busy. I had a force of what was known as the S division. S meaning supply. So I had about 40 men reporting to me, who ran these different facilities. We had a post office on board. We ran that one. The mess, which included people to do the scullery work as well as the cooks. We had a bakery. And we had to get food for all of those people.
Wow.
So
So what was a typical day? When did you get up in the morning to?
Well, it was reveille about 6:30.
6:30, and you would work until when?
Till about 5 or so.
Oh, so it was a regular day.
And we could play cards or play backgammon, icy doosey they called it in those days.
Which is what?
It's a game like backgammon. You use the same kind of a board, but some of the rules are a little different. We spent a lot of time doing that, and we also played bridge and watched movies. And every night, practically, the crew and the officers would all assemble on the back deck, where they could get a showing of a movie.
So these were shown out in the open, is what you're saying?
Out in the open, right?
And you weren't worried about attracting enemy?
No, not at
planes
that time.
Or anything?
No.
So this took place. You were overseas for how long, Marty? In the Pacific campaign.
I guess from 44 to 46. I was overseas, but I was on active duty. After that, I came back and was on active duty until about 47. I did a job on Staten Island when I came back from the Navy, where I was given the task of decommissioning the Staten Island, it's called the Naval base on Staten Island, which had been the place that was used to ship a lot of the officers and men overseas to Europe. We put that out of commission.
Yes. Now, you were also injured during the war at some point?
No, I wasn't injured, but it was turned out that I had a service-connected disability in my chest, which was actually diagnosed as tuberculosis, so that I got a pension when the war was over. I got a 100% pension for a while, and then gradually dwindled down a little bit. And
why don't we just wait 1 second while it
did me for this tuberculosis, and then they discharged me, and I would have been serving in Vietnam, except that I was not able to pass the physical, and so then I was discharged from the Navy. But I was hoping that I could...
Korea, you said Vietnam.
Korea, sorry. I was hoping that I could make 12 years, because at the end of 12 years of service, I already had 5 of them. Then I could be at a pension, but that didn't happen because I...
But so you basically wound up with a medical discharge then at that time?
No, I was discharged because I was unable to pass the physical. You could call it a medical discharge, because I never could serve anymore after that. I didn't want to go to Korea, really.
Sure. Now, what happened when you came out after the war and you were discharged? Did you return back to Harvard then to continue on with your studies?
Yes. I took one more semester at the business school and got my MBA.
Are you all right? You want to stop for a second? Bye.
I lived in Niagara Falls. And Niagara Falls had a very sizable naval air station. And so that was where I was able to preserve my naval active duty, or I guess it was called the organized reserve. It was. Actually, it wasn't discharged. It wasn't retired. You were actually paid for going on duty 1 weekend a month. And I was paid for that, and that was I was able to continue my credit for the ultimate pension, which I was going to get until...
Do you remember what your pay was like in those days, like even going back into World War II?
Well, I should know what the pay was, because I was the guy that paid him.
So as a paymaster, what was a typical wage?
I believe that a plain seaman received $50 a month.
$50 a month for working 7 days a week, 15 hours a day.
And a sergeant, let's say a master sergeant, might make $150 a month, or $30 a month. And an ensign, which was the rank I had, was paid $200 a month.
$200 a month, so that would be $2,500 a year.
Which, of course, the dollar was much less.
Sure, it was worth a lot more at that point in time.
And as I moved up the line from ensign to lieutenant, which is equivalent to a captain in the Army, I guess I was making like $300 a month. And then also, if you were serving overseas, you were entitled to get something they call Sea and Foreign Service Duty, which everybody on active duty overseas got, which added 15% to their base salary. And then they were also given allowance. Enlisted men were given an allowance for their subsistence, and for their relatives, for their kids and wives too. They were given an allowance if they were married. And so we had to keep track of the status of all these people, and we had what they call the roll, ROLL, which was the payroll to tell what people earned and how their pay was distributed and added to and combined. It was a fairly complicated job. I had a safe in which all of my money, cash, was in, and I was the only one that knew the combination to the safe. I don't know what would have happened if...
What would happen if
I died?
Yes.
I guess they'd have to get a pickpocket or something. But I'd keep, on the average, probably those days, $500,000 was a lot of money, and
Wow.
I keep that much money in there. And I had to keep track of it. They used something called a cash book, which was a huge, big, flat book in which you had the debits and the credits, and every entry time you took cash and spent it, you had to make an entry to know, and then every so often, an officer or a team of officers was assigned to audit your cash to make sure that what the cash book said you had
Right.
was actually there. They actually counted the dollars and pennies and cash and so on. So it was accounting, really, is what it was. And of course, I was trained to be an accountant
Sure.
at the Supply Corps School. So you asked about what
And
I
that
did.
basically set up your career. So that work basically set up your career for you when you came out, and you've actually
Yeah.
today you're still doing taxes.
That's right. I couldn't be a lawyer anymore. Well, I could have gone to law school.
So for the past 60 years, the kind of things you learned in the military helped you.
Well, and
basically-
in business school, of
and in
course,
business
too.
school, of course, yes. But I'm saying so there was an outcome from this. One of the outcomes from this war.
That's
Were
right.
there any other outcomes that in any way influenced your life?
Well, the business with my chest and my TB, of course.
Uh-huh.
But when I got out of the Navy, frankly, I was pretty glad to be out of it. Didn't mean anything to me anymore. I didn't want to get back into it again, and I had nothing to do with the Navy anymore. So when I got back, I finished my MBA, got my first job up in Niagara Falls, New York, and I got married, and I started having kids. I ended up having 3 kids. All of them were born in Niagara Falls. And let's stay there about 5 years until a better job came along in middle New York State, upstate New York, in Rome, New York. I stayed there only about a year and a half. I didn't like that city very much, and then moved down to Connecticut. And my next 10 years or so of work was in Connecticut, working for a rubber company and working for a stock market display company, the company that did kept the boards of the prices of different commodities and stocks,
sure.
so people could see them.
Right, but there was nothing in these later jobs that you've taken that were reflecting anything that you
No,
from the service.
I just began to get more and more into data
become a
processing
regular civilian
and computers.
Uh-huh. Did you keep up with any of the guys from your service at all? Did you attend any reunions or join any military organization or anything like that?
No, I did not belong to any of the American Legion or any of those. I didn't really believe in it. They were.
And how does your experience during World War II affect your thinking over the years and even today about war in general? Do you feel that America as a power is doing the right thing? Is going into wars that we are picking judiciously? Or
Now we're getting into politics.
yes, we are. But I was wondering whether your politics are influenced by your experience during World War II.
You know, I never thought of that. Actually, one thing that I've had discussions with Esther about is, should America have dropped the atom bomb?
Yes.
And of course, being there and hating the Japanese at that time, seeing the Japanese killing our people and we killing them, we had a fierce dislike, shall we say, hatred for the Japanese. So we were not at all unhappy when Truman made the decision to drop the atom bomb. I know Esther doesn't agree with that. She felt
But
that.
your feeling is that today you still believe that it was the right thing to do
I do.
because
Well, it ended the war.
it saved American lives as well,
Right, sure.
including your own that might have been
Right,
at the
right.
time.
I was anxious to get back to the States, and actually, we were at the Bikini Crossroads experiment, as it was called. After the atom bomb dropped, we could be there when they dropped some other atom bombs at this little atoll, which we had already been to once, called Bikini.
Bikini, sure.
And I didn't stay to see the atom bomb drop again, but I sailed back to the States about that time, and I was not discharged. I was given other duties because I've had.
Okay. Given
enough
that your
points.
feelings are still support what Harry Truman did, do you think that if you were speaking to your grandchildren at this very moment that you would also support the use of the atom bomb? for
Yes, I
them
think so.
And believe that it was helpful?
As deadly as it was one of the things that made this country become the predominant power of the world, and we had to do that. The Russians had one too, but we were the first to use it.
Okay.
I'm not ashamed of that.
I'm glad to hear that, Marty. Okay, Marty, we're gonna cut this interview now. We, the nation, thank you very much for the service you gave to us and your patriotism that you've shown.
I'm glad I did it.
Okay, bye-bye, Marty.
Okay.